Hi and welcome to all those who've joined us for the first in 2014 of our online clinics. Today we'll be looking at two topics. We'll be looking at editing existing parts and we'll be looking at blue surfacing or using the BlueSurf tool. I'll just start off with editing existing parts. This one here is what's called a well-modelled part, or what I would term a well-modelled part. And basically you can see that it's quite well laid out, and what really defines whether it's a well-modelled part or not is whether or not I can easily make edits to achieve changes that I want to make without the modelling falling over. So I'm just going to dynamically edit the web, and I'm just going to change the web thickness. You can see here I identified that with the quick pick. I've just changed the web thickness, and I might want to change, for example, the outer thickness, which is the result of a thin wall. And we'll go and make a few changes just to verify that this is a well-modelled part and how you would go about editing various aspects of this model. Now you can see here I can't always get to all of the parts in any area of the model. Sometimes I need to select a different area and then I can access the features I want using quick pick. You can of course select the features out of the Pathfinder as well. And you can see here that pretty much any update I make is updating correctly in the model, and the model's behaving without any errors regenerating after I make the edits. So I'll just edit the round values as well. You can see it's all behaving quite nicely and updating quite easily. Next we'll look at a poorly modelled part. Now it's basically the same part, or at least it looks like it. However, you can see by how this model is laid out that it's modelled in a very, very different technique, and when I start making some changes, first of all I've got a whole heap of detached dimensions, and when I update one part of the model, not all of it updates. So now you can see that changing the outer web does not affect the rest of the model. So I'll just undo those changes. Now, how would you approach fixing up this model? Well, the way I would typically approach it now with synchronous is I would move it into synchronous, because synchronous can use the current position of this geometry with respect to the base planes, and you can see there that it's detected a symmetry. I'll just undo that because I don't want to save these changes. However, if the part is not correctly modelled, for example with that hole, then you may not get a symmetry detected. So what we want to go and do is we want to fix up this model so we can edit it and make any changes we want. First thing I'll do is create a base plane, and then I'm going to ground that base plane so it cannot move. Now this is effectively a symmetry plane at 45 degrees. So I go to move that face again, and I can select a local symmetry plane, which includes now the symmetry about that 45 degree plane. What happens if I want that symmetry to be recognised all the time? Well, I can create a symmetry relationship, and that's what I'm just doing here, creating a symmetry relationship about those two faces. Now I may want more than just those two faces, and you'll see a little bit of the work that I'll be doing here is really just creating symmetry about the various faces within the model, because at the moment I don't actually know if these parts and faces are symmetric. Because this has been poorly modelled, there's no way for me to tell except by trying to move it. So just going to make sure that these two holes are symmetric. Then the next two holes, I've got quite a few holes here that I will need to check. And you can see how just using Quick Pick enables me to quite quickly select the holes that I'm actually after. So I'll just continue on and create those symmetric relationships. And as I create the relationships, sometimes you'll even see the parts move. Now, the hole that I showed you earlier that is not symmetrical, in fact I didn't show you this one, but this is another hole that's not symmetrical. I'll just make that symmetrical about the base plane. I'll just rotate the model so I can get the base plane. So that's rotated that. And now I'm just adding the symmetry relationship into these holes. So this, it does take a little while, but depending on the complexity of the part that you've got, sometimes just recreating these constraints, you see there that hole moved, sometimes recreating these constraints is much easier than completely remodelling the part from scratch. So we're just working our way through all of the extra holes. And once I've done this, I'll actually start making some edits. And you'll see the model behaving in a much more predictable and desirable manner when I make some of these changes. For example, I might increase the web thickness, and note it increases the thickness all the way around, and using synchronous I can just key in the difference of that web thickness that I want. I'll edit the dimension here. Now I'll edit it not by moving one face, but by moving the faces symmetrically. And what else do I want to do? Let's change the outer thickness. So I can just key in the change values. Now, you know, I can do all sorts of changes. I can make them all the same or different. However, what happens if I want a particular distance from another face? Well, what I can do is I can hold down the Shift button and click on my primary axis, and this relocates the steering wheel by a specific amount. In this case I want it down, and then I'll move the steering wheel down so that it lines up with the bottom face, and that value I keyed in is now the thickness of that bottom face. So I've got very accurate control over my thicknesses, whether I do it relative to another face or relative to the original design. I'm just moving the top face so it's 45 millimeters from the bottom face. That's one way of setting the thickness. Now I can also set the thickness just by typing in a value. I can change which face I want to move when I make an edit, and then I can just key in a value. That's another way of making the same change. And I'll just put in dimension in. Now if the dimensions don't come off on the plane you desire, you can just use what's called the N key. And the N key toggles it to the next plane, and you'll see that in just a second. the N key toggles it to the next plane available for placement of that dimension. So I don't want that one, hit N. I want this dimension to be, or this plane to be where I want my dimension, and then I can make the change that I desire. And as you can see, it all updates nicely and behaves itself. Alright, so that's how to take a poorly modelled part and make it into a well-behaved part. Next we'll be looking at using the BlueSurf command to replace these faces on this telephone handset. So what I'm going to do first, this is all modelled in solids at the moment and it just doesn't have the shape that we're after. I'll show you an extra sketch in here and I'll actually go to that point in the model. So that rolls back all of the following features. And now I'm going to use the BlueSurf command to create a surface from that end profile through the center profile to the other end. And what I can do using BlueSurf is I can change the end conditions. I've got a variety of options. What I'm going to use here is normal to surface, and I can click on that handle and drag it, or I can just key in the values that I want to affect how far it follows the normal. So once I've created that surface, I now want to actually remove the old surfaces. Now I'll use the replace face command in the next demonstration, but I just wanted to show you at this point in time you can use pretty much any method of removing the old faces, and in this case I'm just going to cut all of the model both sides above that line. So I've just created a cut in there, and now what I'm going to do is use the union command to join the original body back with the new surface body. And this method allows you to generate a much more stylized approach. Now what happens if you want to edit this profile? This sketch I've got here has various dimensions attached to it. I might want to edit the offset or the depth. I might want to edit the angle or the sideways offset, for example. I'll just rotate around. So I can change all of these values, and as you can see the model very, very quickly updates. So it's a very powerful and flexible option there for editing your surfaces. Now if I want to go back and, for example, change the tangency, then all I do is I edit the definition of the BlueSurf. And you can see I can just key in or drag that handle to change the definition and just continue stylizing the product until it's what I want. When I've done that, I just use the go-to command to reactivate the features that I want. Now down the bottom you'll notice there's a couple of failed features. The reason is the surfaces that these features were created on are completely gone. All I need to do is I just go in and redefine which surfaces these features were on, or which edges I should say, and then I just specify them again. Make sure that's 2 mil as it was before. So it's a very, very quick way of making a very, very substantial change in the entire shape of this model just using the BlueSurf command, and now it gives me the flexibility to alter the shape very dramatically as on the fly. So that's a quick look at one method of using the BlueSurf command to edit an existing part. Next I've actually got another part that I'm going to edit using the BlueSurf command, and this might be, for example, a telephone base. Now this is sort of an old school telephone, and it's got an old stylized base, but it's fairly prismatic in shape, fairly square and boxy. What we want, and you can see it's an imported part as well. Now what we want to do is we want to give this a little more shape and a little more style. I'm just going to use the synchronous commands which take advantage of the symmetry about the base plane, and I'll just tip the edges in, for example 5 degrees, and I'll just key that in. But then what I want to do is I want to actually make this curved surface into a much more stylized surface. Now I'll do this in the ordered environment simply because the ordered environment allows you to go back and edit the definition at any point in time, and that can be important for aesthetic surfacing. So I'm just creating a BlueSurf from one edge to the other edge, and then I'm going to insert a sketch on the bottom plane, coincident with the bottom plane, and you can see there that it's now added a sketch onto that plane. Then I'm just going to do the same again, but this time with a parallel plane, and I'll select the parallel plane from the part, not the assembly, parallel to that edge, and as I drag my plane you can see a preview of the sketch, and as soon as I accept it, it generates the sketch. Now I hit finish, and what it will actually give me, you can see on the tree there, is it's inserted a couple of sketches before the BlueSurf. Now I can go in and edit this. I've got various curve control options, in particular the degree of flexibility of the curve, and for this example I want to do a local edit, and I'll just drag out the center curve envelope handle, and it just adds a little bit of gentle curvature to the surface just to make it look a little bit nicer. I'll just do the same thing for the bottom. Again, I want to do a local edit, and I'll change the degree to 4 in this case. And one of the beauties is that I can actually fully dimension and fully control each of these handle points, just like I can any other sketch element. So once I've created that, what remains to do now is actually use what's called the replace face command, and I've also got to basically move the buttons a little bit. So before I replace it, I'll just move the buttons and turn off the surface so I can see properly. Just window select all of those buttons, and I'll say I want to move them normal to, for example, the mid surface or the middle button surface, and I'll just key in an amount. Now the modify command has been in Solid Edge for many years. Once I've done that move, I can then happily replace the existing face with the new face, and you can see there it's now a much more stylized part, just throws nicer shadows and nicer shading, and it looks a little bit more modern than the previous part. Turn off those sketches. However, I can also use what's called the dynamic edit now, and the dynamic edit will update the surfaces live as I'm going. You can see, I can go to the extreme, and it updates the entire, well, it updates the surfaces and then updates the solid with that new surface. So I've got a lot of control options there with the BlueSurf command. It's a very powerful aesthetic modeling tool. So just turn back to the main assembly so you can see the finished product. And your product will probably be quite different to phones, but it gives you the tools to do it. So we'll just switch back to the next clinic. The next clinic will be looking at using Dynamic Designer and Motion in Solid Edge. Quite a powerful tool for simulating all sorts of motion of mechanisms. And if you've got any questions about this webinar, you can either review it online again at the Edge PLM YouTube channel. You can email support@edgeplm.com.au, or you can give support a call if you're a maintenance customer on 1300 883 653. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next one. Bye.